up there with that question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. So if we move to the what is the problem slide, farmers of color in the United States continue to endure systemic racism within the food system. And this racism causes significant and consistent social, political, and economic harm. Farmers of color often have less access to markets, fewer beneficial relationships, and fewer financial resources and opportunities. And this all results in higher rates of debt, lower agricultural land ownership rates, and fewer farmers of color who are able to keep their farms. And if we move to the next slide, we can see racial land loss by the numbers. So in 1910, about 218,000 Black farmers were registered as full or part owners of 15 million acres of land. By 2007, those numbers had dwindled to 28,000 Black farmers who are full or part owners of just under 3 million acres of land. So that's quite a bit of a drop. And census data shows that the average North Carolina farmer runs a 168-acre farm whose market value exceeds $250,000 per year. And in contrast, for African Americans, the average is 95 acres and $73,000. And so we want to pause here. Obviously, these numbers are pretty alarming. And so we're wondering, and I'll put this question in the chat, why do you think the total number of Black farmers has dwindled? Please respond in the chat and let us know what you think. Why do you believe that these numbers of Black farmers and farmers of color in general?
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and note that, you know, these numbers about acres of land, I think that probably all of us could guess that the total number of farmland acres between 1910 and 2007 for all farmers has decreased. But something that's interesting in a kind of devastating way is in 1910, 3% of the farmers in the US were Black. In 2007, it's that same 3% number. So even though the total number of acres of land, of farmland period, has decreased, the number of Black farmers and the percentage that they play in this system has not grown at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see someone mentioned loss of land. Absolutely. Lack of funding and loans. Someone else also named discrimination in access to capital and lack of access to the Department of Agriculture support programs. Absolutely. We'll touch on that in a little bit. Banks not being as willing or forgiving to work with Black farmers and allowing them to keep their farms. Absolutely. And redistributed land and lack of support. Definitely. Yeah, so those are all really good responses and really good answers. So now we're going to explore several of the specific policies and practices that have led to where we are now with farmers of color. And I think you'll see some of your responses highlighted. The first historical policy we want to mention is the Homestead Act. According to the Homestead Act, enacted in 1862, any male adult American citizen and some women that had never fought against the United States government, they were obliged to over 160 acres of land if the requirements were met. However, for most African American, low-class whites, and Native Americans were landless, and this act failed to address their situations. Few farmers and laborers could meet the requirements of the act. and non-white communities like African Americans were left out and did not benefit from the act. The second event is the lynching trail. The significance of land as the drive for Black lynching has been fundamentally disregarded. Black property owners became the target of white supremacist lynch mobs. And in most instances, these attacks generated an extensive exodus of Black communities, areas that have experienced less lynching, rendering many Blacks landless. Over 3,000 African Americans were lynched by these mobs between 1865 and 1965. The continued lynching of affluent Blacks rendered many jobless as the white lynching mobs took over their properties and land. Any slight contact would lead to these lynching incidences and eventual mass migration of Black communities to areas where these cases were minimal. As lynching continued, more wealthy Black men and women lost their properties and land since they were the chief targets. Another historical dynamic that we want to highlight is heirs property. Heirs property is the home or land passed from one generation to the other with few forms of legally established documentation in a family system. For many, this form of ownership limited a family's capacity to establish generational wealth. Heirs property also prevents the efforts of individuals and various organizations from revitalizing African American neighborhoods. The original landowners used the system to participate in the early political life, a system that they thought would positively impact future generations and their legacies. They expected that the ownership structure would help create individual self-sufficiency, equal economic opportunity, and political and economic participation among their descendants. Instead, over the decades, land lost by generations of Black families through the process has been a vital roadblock to low-income families and communities in maintaining connection to their family history and culture. Families have lost land due to illegal actions of dishonest legal representatives, violence initiated against Black landowners that aims at driving them from their properties, racial discrimination from the USDA against Black minority landowners. And the last historical case that we want to mention is Pickford versus Glickman. The Pickford versus Glickman case in 1999 was a legal complaint against the USDA. Black farmers accused the department of alleged racial discrimination against Black communities and farmers when allocating farm grants and loans from 1981 to 1996. African Americans have been segregated and could not access USDA loans. So due to lack of government and state support, many Black families have been forced to sell out or rent their own farms to individuals who can access USDA loans. This case was settled in 1999 with over $1 billion being credited to over 13,000 Black farmers during the lawsuit period, and it remains the largest civil rights settlement in United States history. So we've just gone through several systemic and institutional ways that Black farmers and farmers of color have faced oppression and discrimination over the centuries. And it's important to note that these discriminations build on each other and have a compounding effect. So even if one was solved, like in the Pickford versus Glickman case, it certainly can't undo the damage that has already been done, and it doesn't directly address other forms of oppression. So here we're going to pause, and the question I'm going to put in the chat is, what other forms of discrimination do farmers of color face right now? what other forms of discrimination farmers of color face right now? So feel free to put your answer in the chat or unmute yourself and share.
Hi, this is Larry. I don't know this for a fact, but I could certainly see that that buyers, people who are purchasing, looking at opportunities to purchase product from farmers, just because of the nature of racism, that they would be a lot of the purchasers of product would be oftentimes overlooking Black farmers, and just because, you know what, I'm going to choose to, buy someplace else. That's just a quick one that comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Larry. Yeah, so interpersonal discrimination definitely plays a role. Tom added access to markets for what they produce. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you everyone for your responses. Absolutely, those are definitely ways that farmers of color face discrimination right now. And I think at this point, I'm going to pass it to Michelle, and she's going to talk a little bit about farming and the environment.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. So we'll do a bit of a turn and talk about, oh, it's back one slide, I think. Yeah, farming and the environment. So we're taking a bit of a turn, but we'll soon bring these two ideas together of racial equity and environmental justice. But first, I wanted to share just a little bit about farming and the environment. It's clear that farming and farming practices play a role in the current state of our climate. And there's been a lot of talk lately about promoting regenerative agriculture, which could be loosely defined as agriculture that's more than just environmentally sustainable, but farming that could actually reverse some of the effects of climate change. And discussions around the advantages of regenerative ag have really especially gotten going with the release of the Netflix documentary Kiss the Ground in 2020. And I believe y'all watched it and got to speak with the filmmaker.
I didn't get to speak with the filmmaker. We just got to talk to each other. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. Awesome.
And we also, a lot of us read the article that you forwarded from the counter as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's a lot of what I wanted to talk about, is a bit about the counter article. So some of the practices that are relevant to regenerative ag are things like cover crops, practicing no-till farming, grazing, cattle and sheep. These practices are shown to slow erosion, increase soil moisture, improve biodiversity, and more. However, many farmers are reluctant to take on these practices because of the added cost and complexity that is inherent to these methods. And something that the counter article said is that these practices really change the nature of the work of farming. They shift the emphasis away from production and toward the management of a functioning ecosystem, which is, I think, an important thing to do. But when our country's agricultural system has been built in a way where you have to produce more and more, you have to get big or get out, there's not a lot of economic incentive to take on these practices, right? So taking on these practices means broadening the circle of concerns that a farmer has to care about. And so at the end of the day, farmers have to be able to make a living, and it's not always clear that they can balance needing to produce the large yields to make that living while also stewarding the ecosystem that their farm is part of. And it's in situations like this where government policy could step in and make it advantageous for farmers to use regenerative practices. The same way that USDA has promoted a policy of get big or get out of subsidizing corn and soy, etc. They could subsidize using cover crops or things like that. USDA has paid lip service about the benefit of cover crops and other regenerative agricultural practices, but for years, the agency has basically discouraged farmers from planting cover crops through confusing and overly restrictive rules set by RMA, which is the Risk Management Agency, the agency that determines crop insurance eligibility. All that to say that there are policies within USDA that don't make it easy to be able to make a living while following regenerative agricultural practices. And so until cover crops and other practices are branded by the government as good farming instead of merely just good environmental stewardship, the adoption of these practices by farmers won't reach a critical mass, which would be really important for these practices to make a difference. If we go to the next slide, this table was in that counter article as well, basically just saying that it's not clear what is meant by regenerative agriculture, and no one really agrees on what it means or what it should accomplish and how these benefits should be quantified. And especially this is relevant to us at RAFI because without a clear definition of what regenerative agriculture is, specifically in the policy world, then the policies can't be developed that promote this type of agriculture. So there have been definitions, policy-related definitions for things like sustainable ag and some of these other things, but if there's not a clear definition that USDA and these other agencies can point to and say this is what we're aiming for, then it's hard to reach and hard to measure. And so the picture on this slide shows the results of a review of academic journals that use the term regenerative agriculture and what they were referring to when they use the term. And you can see that it varies widely. So to bring it all together, to tie back in regenerative ag with racial equity, we can look at the next slide. And I really appreciated this quote from Maria Whitaker that says, "Sustainability without justice is merely sustained injustice." So it's worth discussing regenerative agriculture in relation to racial justice. So to bring our earlier conversation about policies and practices that discriminated against and oppressed Black farmers into this conversation about regenerative ag. And I think this quote that's on the slide right here really points to the fact that environmental and racial justice are always connected and they can't be treated as separate goals to be achieved independently. They're weaved together and we can't say that we're only working on one without the other playing a role in it. Regenerative agriculture must consider the consequences of these centuries of discrimination and what it has meant for Black farmers. And a vision of ag that is regenerative, but that ignores access and equity would be really ineffective, and it would undermine its conservation goals from the outset. And it's also worth noting that Black farmers and Indigenous farmers have been using regenerative practices for generations, in part because they've been shut out of having access to these government loans that would have allowed them the ability to get big. And getting big encourages the use of less environmentally sustainable practices. So without that access, Black and Indigenous and people of color farmers have been using more environmentally sustainable practices for generations. It's also worth noting, things like becoming certified organic takes years, thousands of dollars, lots of paperwork. So a lot of the farmers of color that we work with, they are using organic practices, even though they can't claim that they are USDA certified organic, right? So that's one example just to say that it's all complicated is a short way to say that. So I'm going to pass it back over to Jared, and he's going to talk a little bit about how we see farmers of color and faith communities responding to some of these issues that we've just talked about.
Thanks, Michelle. So given all of these issues, given the lack of food access that many North Carolinians experience, and given the situation that farmers of color around the country find themselves in, and also given RAFI's experience in working with churches and farmers of color, we have developed the Farm and Faith Partnerships Project. This project is a collaboration between the Farmers of Color Network, our expanding farmers market access work, and Come to the Table. The goal of the Farm and Faith Partnerships Project is to counteract injustices in the food system that marginalize farmers of color and rural communities by creating mutually beneficial and self-sustaining economic partnerships between farmers of color on the one hand and faith groups in their communities on the other. These relationships, we hope, result in farmers of color gaining additional sources of income and increased access to new local markets. And for rural faith communities, we hope that this means gaining increased food security and access to fresh, healthy foods. These connections can look different depending on the context, but they could look like a group of churches coming together, form a food box purchasing group to purchase from a local farmer, or like a church hosting a farmer's market in their parking lot. Through these farm and faith relationships, congregations are able to participate in the building of thriving local food systems and economies, while also engaging in relational ministries with farmers in their communities. So if we move to the next slide, an example that we want to highlight is our Wake County CSA. One way that these farm and faith partnerships can look like is hosting a congregation-based local CSA. CSA is short for Community Supported Agriculture, and it's a way for farmers to have guaranteed income so that they know that there will be buyers for what they're growing. One way to think about this process is that it is similar to matchmaking. RAFI staff will be able to match congregations with farmers of color in their community based on what the congregations need and what the farmers are able to offer. So for example, the spring season of the Wake County CSA, our first pilot project, has run for 8 weeks with farmers having planted in mid-February and deliveries happening May through June. The CSA includes 8 different churches and over 120 people throughout Wake County participating. And the CSA brought in about $20,000 total in produce sales for 3 local farmers of color during the spring season. And I'll add that the CSA is continuing into the summer with 3 additional churches joining and definitely many more people participating. If we move to the next slide, another way that we've seen churches connect with farmers in their community is through our mini grants program. Since March of 2020, Come to the Table has awarded over 100 grants to rural UMC churches throughout North Carolina who have been responding to the increased hunger in their communities caused by the pandemic. These mini grants are made possible through the support of the Duke Endowment and provide funding to churches who are purchasing food from local growers or local restaurants to distribute in their communities. For example, in this picture, you can see Robert Jones, a member of our Farmers of Color Network, who we connected with Brogden UMC in Wayne County. Brogden UMC was able to use the grant money to purchase from Mr. Jones and then distribute that food in the community. If we move to the next slide, lastly, we wanted to briefly mention how you can get involved in policy advocacy around a lot of the issues that we've addressed. The Justice for Black Farmers Act has been introduced into the Senate. The Justice for Black Farmers Act increases oversight to prevent future USDA discrimination and direct support to help Black farmers succeed. Land access, training and apprenticeships, credit assistance, funding for historically Black colleges and universities, and more. The act would also make overall improvements to the food system by dramatically increasing funding to support local and regional food economies, financial and technical assistance to help farmers tackle climate change, increase renewable energy, and fight corporate domination of the livestock and poultry. So we send out action alerts most Tuesdays through our Take Action Tuesdays listserv. There, you're able to click a link, enter your zip code, and a pre-written email that you can edit will be sent to your selected officials. We've recently held Take Action Tuesday events for the Justice for Black Farmers Act and for a comment period that the USDA was having related to Farms and Families Food Box Program, where churches and food banks offer feedback on the program. So I will.
Can I jump in?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to address, there was a question about regenerative ag and are there leaders in Congress or in the Biden administration? I was just trying to look through my email. So there was the Agricultural Resilience Act, which Representative Pingree, I believe she's from Maine, introduced in the House. So that was introduced in the last session of Congress, and it was reintroduced for this 117th Congress. I'm not sure of the current status of it, but that is an act that was designed to address the relationship between farming and climate and trying to promote some of that. I'll also mention, y'all might have heard about the BIPOC debt relief that was passed and that there are lawsuits against that some white farmers have brought against it. But basically that relief is designed to forgive the loans of BIPOC farmers. And I know that we were trying to help farmers make sure that they are they have the right racial status on file with FSA, because my understanding is the default status, it would just put you as a white farmer if you didn't like click the appropriate boxes or whatever. It would just default to white, which I feel like there's a metaphor there. So anyway, all that to say, we do work around policy mostly on the federal level, and the best way to kind of stay in touch with that is to join our email list. I think, were you about to put that link in the chat, Jared, when I interrupted you? Yep, okay. So we have a question. Agriculture is the #1 economic activity in North Carolina. Those of us in urban areas don't often think about the huge role played by ag and NC. Can you talk about the rural-urban divide with regard to support for Black farmers? Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I can wind my way into an answer. When we think about agriculture in North Carolina, a lot of it is, there's a lot of contract hog growing, there's a lot of contract chicken growing, sweet potatoes, a lot of the commodities, a lot of these types of farming that, because it's more of that get big or get out type of farming that Black farmers haven't had access to. So I think that plays a role. I think, I'm not sure how else to respond. Do you have any ideas, Jerry?
No, I don't think I do, actually. Yeah, that's a really good question.
I'll put it, this is Chris. Let me put it maybe a different way that would be helpful for y'all is, you're from RAFI, but you also mentioned y'all live in Durham, all three of you. So what is it specifically is we're in Durham and your pilot program's in Wake too. So are there specific actions to just for us to know about how things are going in the rural, because I think there are Black farmers in Durham and that we could possibly partner with or do. I mean, I know Rafi Taz's farmers and they probably don't, I don't know, I'm just randomly spewing things, but just is there anything specific that an urban church would do in this specific realm?
Yeah, I mean, I think your example that you just gave of the Wake County CSA is a great one that, we have found, I think we're up to 11 churches now that will be part of the Wake County CSA. And we have, if we go back a few slides to the mini grant ones, so that's a good example of, there we go. That's a good example of how we've been working with rural communities and Black farmers. So those are examples of, we awarded $1,000 mini grants to churches that were going to purchase from farmers, and specifically we connected churches with farmers of color in their community. And so, yeah, this is like Robert Jones and Brogdon UMC, and there were several other connections that we were able to make. And many of these connections are continuing even after the grant is over. So, we haven't talked with those churches about, policies that they would support related to this, but at least in terms of, building those relationships and economics, that is something that is happening. Yeah.
And then individually, where would one find a list of Black farmers through the CSA that we could connect with? Because in fact, my wife and I, she just brought this up like 2 months ago. She said something like, "Oh, I really would be interested in, because right now we do have a CSA," and it's we were like, "But I would be interested in a list of Black farmers that have CSA associations with." So yeah, just how would you go about that individually?
Yeah, so we don't maintain a list of Black farmers, but I can share for the Wake County CSA. Jared, maybe you can tell a little bit of the story of like how it got formed. That might be helpful.
Yeah. So in terms of how the Wake County CSA was formed, originally we were working with Elke and Steve McCullough. So they own Rocky Ridge Farm in Lewisburg. And so them as farmers, along with a particular faith community UCC, they kind of helped us organize other churches in their community. So we went from 1 church to 8 churches ultimately, and now 11. And then once we figured out that the demand for shares far exceeded the capacity of the McCulloughs, we added Ken Daniel, who owns Singing Stream Farm, as well as Demetrius Hunter of the Black Farmers Hub, and also LaTanya Andrews, who owns Soul City Farm. I believe she was featured in the News and Observer fairly recently. So yeah, I think in terms of you being connected with a farmer, if you are planning on purchasing significant amounts with your congregation or group of people, we could definitely do some work in connecting you. But there are also already definitely Black farmers throughout both Durham County, Wake County, that are doing lots of work, both through farmers markets and through CSA.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you know, the CSA in Wake County, it wasn't something that the farmers had going before it was formed by the congregation. So it was really through these congregations coming together and saying like, yes, we are committing to purchasing from you. And with the help of RAFI and providing some technical assistance, they were able to develop these CSAs, right? So all that to say, if there is interest with y'all's church or with other churches in Durham, like that could be something where we could help get a similar project going, where farmers who maybe haven't had CSAs before now do have the support and the capacity to be able to do it. And, you know, something that Jared has shared is that through just the spring CSA cycle, the 3 farmers were able to raise or earn a total of $20,000 just from the CSA that they hadn't had before. So it's a really great way to build the capacity and you know, earning potential of these farmers. Yeah, so the Black Farmers Market, we've worked with them somewhat. We don't like sponsor it or anything like that, but we know many of the farmers who are there, and we've worked with the market manager a little bit. Yeah.
Roughly, do you have a sense of how many shares it would take for a farmer to say yes to? You know, it'd be worth, I mean, I'm sure I have confidence that we could get a number of people through this church to be interested, but I don't know what any sense of the numbers it takes to draw the interest of a farmer that maybe isn't involved with the CSA.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I could give you a specific example. I say that because I think how a share is defined probably changes from CSA to CSA or farmer to farmer.
Right.
So for example, for the spring season for the Wake County CSA, I think we defined a full share as being designed for 4 adults for each of the 8 weekly deliveries to each have 5 servings of vegetables. And so, for instance, with the McCulloughs and Rocky Ridge Farm, their total capacity was about 30 shares through the season. So I think in terms of what it would take for a specific farmer for it to be worth their time, it definitely depends on their total capacity as a farmer. So their total capacity might be 25 shares or 50 shares or 100 shares, but they would definitely want it to be a certain percentage of their capacity. Accordingly, the Wake County CSA share prices, I believe it was $250 for 1 full share, which was 8 weekly deliveries. So hopefully that gives you kind of a sense, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would really just depend on the farmer and whatever kind of connections and relationships they already had, what their capacity is, things like that.
Yeah, and just to maybe add a little bit, for the Wake County CSA, it's 80 shares for this spring season that have been divided between 3 farmers. So basically about 20 to 30 shares per farmer. And so once Steve and Elke kind of met their capacity, then we started pulling in more farmers when the interest from the churches was still there, right? So we reached out to other farmers and made it work. Whereas in Winston-Salem, we're working on getting one going, and we have one farmer who her capacity is around 80 shares. Is that right? So it kind of really depends on the farmer.
Thanks, that was helpful.
But yeah, we would love, you know, I'm in Durham. I would love to join a CSA like this if this was something that y'all were interested in, or if you thought that other churches might be interested in it. And we can definitely keep reaching out to churches that we know in Durham. Yeah, we have the Wake County one going. One in Winston-Salem is going to be starting this fall. And we're hopefully going to be starting a Chatham County one as well. So it's definitely being replicated throughout the state.
Yeah.
Cool. Michelle, was there anything else? Did you have any other questions? I'm just wondering if, or does anyone else have any questions for Rafi? I think that would be, especially if Rafi was able to help establish the relationship, because I think, us blundering through and like just going out the farm, that just doesn't seem like that, the right way to approach that. So in terms of helping broker is also not the right word, but set up these conversations about possibly doing this in Durham would be great. And I'm sure Larry would be really happy to work on that with us for us. Is there anything else from anyone else? Thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us and speak with us.
Yeah, I'll just put our contact information in the chat. Feel free to definitely reach out, and I think Jared put the email list subscribe. So especially if you're interested in staying up to date on policy stuff, there's email list that you can join related to that. But yeah, we would just love to stay in touch with y'all, just in general. Yeah.
And you said that the Come to the Table conference is in 2022. Is that right?
Yeah, in
Okay.
March in Greenville. Yeah, so
Okay.
still several months away, but we're preemptively excited.
That was good.
Yeah, this is Larry again. I mean, I'm an optimist, and I think a lot of things can be done that oftentimes aren't done or don't get accomplished. But in terms of the things that I think that can be done, and that people in church groups and neighborhoods, the people that this is doable. This kind of, to me, in my mind, this is something that makes sense. There are a lot of people, I believe, in our congregation and our communities around here that want to have CSAs. They want to get fresh food. They want to support local farmers. They want to support local Black farmers. So I think what you're doing and helping to make happen is real, and it has legs. And I'd like to hope that our congregation can be part of that, because I feel like it's very achievable.
We have a worksheet. Well, that's
Yeah. David reminded us, so we have a worksheet that's designed for churches, and it's essentially a quick checklist for churches that are interested in buying produce from a farmer. So this will help churches kind of think through those steps and be ready to articulate their needs when the time comes and they want to form a relationship.
all right. Is anything from anyone else for Rafi? Or I would ask someone to close us out in prayer. I could ask our pastor to do that. I could probably ask someone from Rafi, but I don't want to put them on the spot.
Jared said he was pastor formerly, so I bet he's got some praying chops, but I will pray. I'm happy to do that, honored to do that. Let us pray. Loving God, you are a God of grace and mercy and peace and justice, and we give you thanks for the calling that you have given to us to be people of love and justice. We give you thanks for our guests tonight from Rafi, and for all the work that they are doing for racial justice and for farming ministry and work. We give you thanks for those on this call who also have a vision for what can be done, and a desire to learn and to grow and to stretch. And so lead us in the right path, that we might be able to do more in these directions, to see the way that, to partner with you in the way that you are already moving throughout our community and our state and our country and our world to bring eco-justice wherever we go. We give you thanks for this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks, folks. And thanks again for joining and being with us today. This is very, very helpful. And we'll be in touch soon. I'm sure some semblance of something is going to happen.
Wonderful.
We do all eat, so we will.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks
you
for
all.
being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye.